Marcus Daniels had waited his whole life for this day. After spending 6 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit, today was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter. Fresh out of prison, file in hand, evidence in tow, Marcus stood at the polished glass doors of one of the most prestigious law firms in the city, Whitaker & Sloan. He wasn't here to beg. He wasn't here to plead. He was here to seek justice. Not just for himself but for every black man who had been wrongfully accused, silenced, or thrown away like trash by a system built to fail them. Dressed in a worn gray suit that barely fit anymore, Marcus walked into the lobby with quiet dignity. The receptionist glanced at him with a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, clearly doubtful. "Yes," Marcus said calmly. "I have a consultation with attorney Heather Sloan." Her eyebrows lifted. "You sure?" He nodded. "She's expecting me. It's regarding a wrongful conviction appeal. My case has new evidence." She made a call, whispered something into the receiver, and after a long pause directed him to wait. Minutes passed. Then the elevator dinged. Upstairs, Heather Sloan stood in her office, flawless, confident, sharp as a scalpel. The kind of woman who could cut through opposing counsel with a glance. Blonde, brilliant, and born into generational wealth, she didn't see clients like Marcus. She didn't have to. Her firm cherry-picked cases, high-profile, media-friendly, and usually involving clients who wore Rolexes, not ankle monitors. When she saw Marcus walk in, her smile froze. He extended a hand politely. "Miss Sloan, I appreciate you making the time." She didn't take it. "Let me stop you right there," she said coolly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I don't take criminal appeals." "Your assistant said otherwise," Marcus replied. He placed a thick folder on her desk. "My case file. DNA evidence, recanted witness testimony, and a confession from the real perpetrator. I was framed. 6 years. Gone." Heather barely glanced at it. "That's unfortunate," she said, brushing invisible dust off her blazer. "But we don't handle these types of cases. Try legal aid." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I'm not asking for a handout. I have money. A small settlement from the state. I can pay." "It's not about money," she said coldly. "It's about image. And frankly, this isn't a case we want our name on." Marcus's eyes locked on hers. "So because I'm black and I was in prison, you don't want to help me?" Heather raised an eyebrow. "Don't play the race card. This is about professional standards." Marcus gave a bitter smile. "Right. And I suppose those standards only apply when the client doesn't look like your friends at the country club." He picked up his folder slowly, his dignity still intact. "I came here hoping to find justice. I guess I found something else." He turned to leave. But just before the door closed behind him, he stopped. "You know what's funny, Miss Sloan?" he said without turning. "You might want to remember my name. Because something tells me you're going to hear it again. Real soon." Then he was gone. Back in the lobby, the receptionist avoided eye contact as Marcus exited. Outside, he took a deep breath, the city buzzing around him. He wasn't angry. He was used to rejection. But what he wasn't used to was giving up. That night, Marcus sat alone in his one-bedroom apartment, reviewing the same documents for the 100th time. His mother had passed while he was still inside. His little sister barely spoke to him. All he had left was the truth, and the quiet, growing fire inside him that refused to go out. He wasn't going to let this end here. Meanwhile, at Whitaker & Sloan, Heather Sloan sipped wine at a firm gala. Her father, one of the founding partners, clinked glasses with a federal judge. "Our next case is gonna make headlines," he said proudly. "Heather's leading it. Corporate discrimination. Easy win." She smiled, posed for photos, and basked in applause. She had no idea her world was about to be flipped upside down. Because the next morning, a major story hit the news cycle. Wrongfully convicted man launches civil rights initiative against city prosecutors. The name? Marcus Daniels. Heather froze mid-sip as she saw his face on TV. She blinked, stunned. "That's the guy I turned away yesterday." Her assistant walked in. "You should see this, ma'am," she said, holding out a tablet. A viral video was circulating. Marcus had gone to a local podcast, telling his story with quiet power and undeniable truth. "I went to the top law firms in this city. And I was rejected, not because my case wasn't valid but because of how I looked. One lawyer in particular, He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. Heather Sloan. She saw a statistic, not a man. The video exploded online. Thousands of comments. Petitions. Outrage. Back at the firm, chaos erupted. Clients pulled out. Media showed up. Protesters gathered outside the building. Heather was called into an emergency board meeting. "What were you thinking?" her father snapped. "This could tank us." Heather was speechless. "I didn't know who he was." "That's the problem," one partner shouted. "You didn't care to find out." That night, as she left the office through the back to avoid cameras, Heather saw something that stopped her cold. Marcus Daniels. Standing across the street. Calm. Confident. And this time, not alone. Behind him stood a group of young black professionals, lawyers, activists, students. Holding signs that read, "Justice isn't a luxury. We are not invisible. Daniels for justice." Marcus locked eyes with her. Then turned and walked away, straight into the arms of a crowd that saw him for who he really was. The next day, Heather Sloan receives an unexpected call from the Justice Department. A senior official is requesting a private meeting to discuss Marcus Daniels. But when she enters the room, it isn't a government official waiting. It's Marcus. And this time, he's sitting on the other side of the table, in a tailored suit, with legal documents in hand. "Let's talk," he says. Heather Sloan stood frozen in the doorway, her designer heels sinking into the plush carpet of the private conference room. This couldn't be real. She had expected some gray-haired federal official to discuss the media frenzy and help her do damage control. Instead, there sat Marcus Daniels, dressed in a custom navy suit, crisp white shirt, gold tie clip shining in the morning light. His posture was calm, composed. But there was steel in his eyes. And beside him sat another man. African-American, mid-40s, sharp like Marcus but older. U.S. Assistant Attorney General Darius King, the man said, offering a hand to Heather. "Please have a seat." Heather sat slowly, her pulse racing. I don't understand. What's going on?" Marcus looked at her, not with anger, but with the chilling calm of someone who no longer needed to prove himself. "What's going on is this. You passed up an opportunity to stand on the right side of justice. Now that justice is coming whether you like it or not." Darius leaned forward. "Miss Sloan, the Department of Justice is investigating patterns of racial bias in the city's legal institutions. Your firm has come up more than once. The Daniels case just lit the match." Heather blinked. "Wait, are you saying we're under investigation?" "We're saying," Marcus interjected, "that the culture of elitism and exclusion you protect is being exposed." Heather tried to control her voice. "Look, I didn't know about your case. I didn't know you had evidence. It wasn't personal." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "But it was. It always is, even when you pretend it's not. You saw a black man in a second-hand suit and assumed the worst." Darius King opened a folder and slid it toward her. "You might want to review that. It's a preliminary notice of legal action. Marcus Daniels is filing a federal civil rights suit, and your firm is one of the named parties." Heather's face flushed. "This is absurd. You can't seriously be pinning this on me." Marcus leaned in. "You were the last lawyer I came to. The one who slammed the door in my face. Your name is in the paperwork because it should be." Meanwhile, across the city, news stations buzzed with the story. Marcus's video had hit over 5 million views. Interviews were being requested. Grassroots campaigns were erupting. A former inmate with a quiet voice had suddenly become a national figure. Not because he screamed, but because he spoke the truth with humility and conviction. People weren't just listening, they were rallying. Civil rights organizations, pro bono attorneys, even retired judges were calling to support him. But Marcus had a plan, and he wasn't interested in media stunts. He wanted results. Later that evening, Heather sat in her penthouse apartment, glass of wine untouched, TV on mute. Her phone buzzed. Her father. Again. She didn't answer. The board was furious. Long-standing clients were freezing their accounts. Sponsors were walking away from the charity gala. Everything she had built, or rather, inherited, was cracking under pressure. She finally opened her laptop and watched the full podcast Marcus had done. It wasn't angry. It was human. He spoke about the day he was arrested. How he had been walking home from his construction job when police threw him against a wall. About the trial where no one listened. About the cell where he taught himself the law by flashlight. About the officer who confessed 6 years later, and the prosecutor who buried it. Heather closed the laptop slowly. For the first time she felt it, not guilt exactly but shame. The kind that creeps in when you finally realize you've been blind by choice. The next morning she returned to the office, where cameras swarmed the entrance. Inside, the managing partners sat stone-faced. "Heather," her father said sternly, "you've become a liability. We can't have your face tied to this firm any longer," another said. "Effective immediately, we're placing you on indefinite leave." Heather opened her mouth to protest but stopped. For once she had nothing to say. At a quiet diner in the south end of the city, Marcus sat across from an old friend, Tyrone, another ex-Neary who had spent 10 years for a crime he didn't commit. "You really did it, man," Tyrone said. "You made him see you." Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. They see the headlines. But until something changes for the next kid getting picked up for no reason, I'm not done." That's when his phone rang. "Mr. Daniels," the voice said. "This is Governor Elkins's office. The governor would like to meet with you, personally." Later that week, Heather Sloan stood outside a courthouse, not as an attorney but as a civilian. She watched as Marcus walked up the steps, flanked by a small team of lawyers, black, brown, white, young, bold. All of them there because one man had refused to accept silence. Reporters swarmed him. "Mr. Daniels, what are you hoping to achieve today?" "Justice," he said plainly. "Not just for me. For the voiceless. For those who don't get second chances. For those who were never given a first." Heather watched him disappear inside, her heart caught in her throat. That night Heather receives a private letter. No return address. Just a seal. Office of Civil Rights, Department of Justice. She opens it slowly. Inside is a summons. She's being called to testify. Under oath. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths. Heather Sloan stared at the summons in her trembling hands, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the thick envelope. She had never been on this side of the system. Testify? Her mind reeled. She was a Sloan. A name that once commanded respect across every courtroom in the city. But now that name was stained, and for the first time she was being summoned not to prosecute, but to answer. Under oath. She could feel the walls closing in. Her father had always told her the legal world was a game of chess. But no one had ever prepared her to be the pawn. 3 days later, Heather entered a secure conference room in a federal building downtown. Gone were the stilettos and designer suits. She wore a conservative navy blouse, flats, and no makeup. Across from her sat 3 government attorneys. One of them, a young black woman named Asha Monroe, led the questioning. Her voice was firm, measured. "Miss Sloan, were you aware that your firm rejected over a dozen civil rights claims brought forward by individuals of color in the past 5 years?" Heather blinked. I wasn't involved in those decisions directly. But you were involved in the Daniels rejection?" "Yes," Heather whispered. "I didn't believe the case had merit." "Because of the evidence?" Asha asked, eyebrow raised. "Or because of the man?" Heather didn't answer. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in a quiet conference room with Darius King and his new legal team. His face was focused, but his hands were clasped tightly together on the table. They were preparing for the biggest legal challenge of his life. A civil suit against not just the local precinct, but against Sloan and Stone, the powerhouse firm that had symbolized exclusion and prejudice for decades. "They'll come after your character," one attorney warned. "They'll try to paint you as an angry ex-con with a vendetta." Marcus nodded. "Then I'll show them what redemption really looks like." Darius leaned forward. "This case isn't just about you anymore, Marcus. It's about setting a precedent. We win this, we change everything." Back at the Sloan family estate, Heather's father, Gerald Sloan, paced the marble foyer, phone pressed tightly to his ear. "She what?" "She agreed to testify?" He barked into the line. His wife looked on, her face pale. "They're setting her up to take the fall. This isn't just about some ex-con. This is about dismantling the legacy I built." The partner on the other end of the line replied, "Then we need to shut this down before it reaches court. Or the entire foundation of Sloan and Stone crumbles." Gerald clenched his jaw. "Leave it to me." Meanwhile, Marcus's name continued to spread. Not just across legal circles but across communities who had long been silenced. He started hosting small town hall meetings, sitting with people who had similar stories. Mothers who lost sons to wrongful convictions. Teens harassed and profiled. Old men who spent decades behind bars for crimes they didn't commit. And Marcus listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't grandstand. He just listened. And that was what made people trust him. One afternoon, after a particularly emotional meeting, Marcus walked to his car and found a note tucked under his windshield. It was written in rushed, shaky handwriting. "You're not safe. They know you're winning. Be careful." He looked around. Nothing seemed out of place. But that night he felt it, a car following him for too many blocks. A shadow standing too long outside his building. Darius urged him to stay with friends at least for a few nights. "We're stirring up a system that was never meant to be challenged," he warned. "You've made enemies, Marcus. Powerful ones." At the same time, Heather's own world was unraveling. The media had found out about her federal summons. News anchors speculated on her role in Marcus's case. Old law school classmates posted cryptic messages about her past comments. "Didn't she once say, 'Clients like that always lie'?" one tweet read. Another post surfaced an old recording from a bar, Heather joking with colleagues about a client's appearance. The fallout was brutal. She became a symbol of everything wrong with the elite legal class: cold, out of touch, racially biased. In private, Heather began to spiral. She drank alone, stared at her degree on the wall and wondered who she had become. But late one night she opened an email that changed everything. It was from a name she hadn't seen in years: Dr. Christina Moore, her old law professor. A black woman who had once mentored her. The email was short. It said, "I watched the video. I remembered who you were when you were young. Before the power, before the pride. I hope you find your way back. Call me if you do." Heather stared at the message for a long time. Then she shut her laptop, wiped her face, and stared at her reflection in the dark glass of her office. Maybe it wasn't too late. The next morning she showed up, unexpected, at Marcus Daniels' community legal clinic. A few volunteers froze when they saw her walk through the door. Marcus was in a meeting but came out when he heard the whispers. Heather looked different. Raw. No makeup. Simple clothes. "Can we talk?" she asked. He nodded slowly. They stepped into his office. "I didn't come to beg," Heather said. "I came because I want to make it right." Marcus folded his arms. "What does right mean to someone like you?" "I'm willing to testify. Truthfully. I'll name the partners. I'll expose the pattern. I'll burn the entire lie to the ground if it means it helps your case." Marcus studied her. "Why now?" "Because you reminded me of what justice is supposed to look like." He paused. Then slowly he said, "If you do this, there's no going back." "I know," Heather said quietly. "Maybe that's what I need." Just days later, the courtroom was packed. Media swarmed the entrance. Protesters stood outside with signs reading "Justice for Marcus," and "This system must change." Inside, Heather Sloan took the stand. Cameras rolled as she swore to tell the truth. She described, in harrowing detail, the systemic bias embedded in Sloan and Stone's culture. The unwritten rules. The mockery of clients from marginalized backgrounds. The time she was told to screen out the troublemakers. Every word landed like a thunderclap. And then she said it: "I turned Marcus Daniels away, not because of evidence but because of my own prejudice. I failed him. And others. I can't undo it, but I can stop lying." The courtroom buzzed. Marcus sat frozen. The judge banged the gavel for silence. And just when it seemed the air might settle, the courtroom doors burst open. 2 federal agents rushed to the judge's bench. Whispers spread like wildfire. The judge's eyes go wide. He leans toward the agents, listening closely. Then he clears his throat and says, "There has been a development. One that may fundamentally alter the course of this trial." Marcus looks up, confused. The judge stares at him and says, "Mr. Daniels, the man who originally falsified evidence against you, has just turned himself in." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Reporters scrambled to update their live feeds. Marcus Daniels sat motionless, trying to process what he had just heard. The man who falsified evidence against him had turned himself in? The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding order. "Everyone calm down. We will resume in 5 minutes. Mr. Daniels remained seated. Counsel approached the bench. Darius stood, exchanging a brief glance with Marcus. Then he moved forward, whispering urgently with the judge and federal agents. Heather Sloan sat back on the witness stand, her chest rising and falling as if she'd just come up for air. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The name they whispered hit her like a punch to the gut. Detective Raymond Rourke. He had been a legend in the city. Decorated. Respected. Ruthless. He was also the man who had built the entire case against Marcus Daniels years ago. His testimony, his evidence, his report, the linchpin to Marcus's conviction. Now he had walked into a federal office and confessed. When court resumed, the judge addressed the gallery. This trial will now include supplemental testimony from a new witness who has provided sworn affidavits concerning misconduct within the original investigation of Mr. Daniels' arrest. Further proceedings will be sealed until reviewed. Marcus turned to Darius. What does this mean? It means they're rattled, Darius said. The people who buried you, they're starting to dig up their own dirt before someone else does. That night, across newsrooms and social media, the story exploded. Breaking, retired Detective Raymond Rourke admits to evidence tampering in 2008 Daniels case. Justice system in crisis. Whistleblowers expose web of corruption. Former prosecutor Heather Sloan testifies against her own firm in landmark discrimination case. Public outrage surged like a tidal wave. But behind the scenes, darkness brewed. Marcus began receiving anonymous threats. Drop the case or regret it. You think you're a hero? You're a target. We don't forget. Darius upped security at the firm. Armed guards now stood outside their building. Staff worked in teams. They scanned their cars, locked their files, encrypted everything. Meanwhile, Heather Sloan's life unraveled even faster. Her father, Gerald Sloan, had been eerily silent since her courtroom confession. But now he was on the offensive. He called press conferences, claimed Heather was emotionally unstable and manipulated by radical activists. He painted her as a traitor to the firm, to her family, to the profession. She's not well, he declared. She's disgruntled and vindictive. And we will expose her lies in court. Heather stood at a podium just hours later with her own statement. I'm not disgruntled. I'm guilty. I lived a lie. I helped enforce a system that silenced innocent voices for profit and prestige. And now that system is scared, because truth doesn't need a PR campaign. She turned, walked away, and refused to answer questions. As the new trial hearings began behind closed doors, Marcus was called to testify again. This time not as a victim, but as a man reclaiming his voice. He stood before the court and described every moment of his wrongful conviction. The fear, the silence, the disbelief. The years he spent feeling invisible. The parole meetings where no one listened. The job interviews that ended as soon as they saw his record. But then he said something no one expected. I'm not just here for justice for me. I'm here for every kid who gets profiled. Every man who can't vote because of a felony he didn't commit. Every mother who visits a prison when she should be visiting her son's graduation. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge seemed to blink back emotion. That night, outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Hundreds held candles. Chants echoed through the streets. We believe Marcus. Justice for the innocent. Marcus stood in the window of the building and looked out. For the first time he saw more than anger. He saw hope. But just as the tide seemed to be turning, a new storm began brewing. Darius received a sealed legal notice. A counterclaim had been filed. Gerald Sloan was suing Marcus Daniels for defamation. His claim? That Marcus had maliciously and publicly damaged the reputation of Sloan and Stone with false accusations, unproven claims, and reckless disregard for the truth. Marcus laughed bitterly when he read it. They're trying to bury me again. Darius's jaw was tight. This isn't about winning anymore. It's about intimidation. They want you too exhausted to keep going. Heather slammed a folder on the table. Then let me give them something real to fear. Inside the folder were years of emails. Internal memos. Case notes. Some of it encrypted. Some of it scanned and printed. All of it damning. She had copied the firm's internal communications before she walked away. Proof of racial profiling in case selection. Comments about how those clients don't pay anyway. policies that explicitly deprioritized civil rights litigation for black and brown clients. "This will destroy them," Darius whispered. "It should," Heather said, fire in her voice. But there was one document at the bottom of the folder, one that chilled Marcus to the bone. A confidential memo from 2008. Subject, Daniels case. From Gerald Sloan. To Day Office. "If we bury the inconsistencies early and control the media narrative, this one's dead in the water. Keep it quiet and he'll go away." Marcus couldn't speak. The proof had always been there. And now, the world would see it. Days before the final hearing, Heather received an anonymous package at her apartment. Inside was a flash drive. No note. No name. She plugged it in cautiously. What she saw left her breathless. It was a hidden recording. Grainy. But unmistakable. A meeting between her father and city officials. Gerald Sloan was speaking. "This Daniels kid thinks he's the face of a movement? Let's see how loud he is when nobody's left standing beside him." A second voice replied, "We can leak a sealed document. Something about his past." Heather hit pause. They were planning to destroy Marcus. Again. And this time from the shadows. She looked at the camera. At her father's face. She whispered, "You're going to war with the wrong man." Cliffhanger for Part 5 finale. The night before the final court date, Marcus receives a call. It's from an unlisted number. He answers. A voice, familiar, cold, speaks. "You show up tomorrow, and everything you love burns." Then the line goes dead. Marcus stares at the phone. Breath heavy. Jaw clenched. And for a long moment he says nothing. Then quietly he says, "Let it burn." The courtroom was a fortress that morning. Media vans surrounded the building like vultures. Armed guards stood shoulder to shoulder at every entrance. Protesters lined the sidewalk, holding signs that read "Justice for Marcus" and "No more lies." But inside that courtroom, it was quiet. The air was thick, charged. Like everyone knew this wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. Marcus Daniels walked through the courthouse doors with Darius Carter at his side. No suit. No tie. Just a clean white shirt and eyes that had seen too much. Heather Sloan followed behind, clutching a manila envelope so tightly her knuckles turned white. At the defense table, Gerald Sloan waited. Calm. Smiling. His legal team looked smug, armed with counterclaims, attack strategies, and influence. The kind of people who never believed they could lose. They hadn't counted on the world watching. Or the truth being louder than money. The judge entered. Everyone stood. And the final hearing began. Darius opened with fire. He laid out the years of evidence. The wrongful conviction, the forged signatures, the suppressed documents, the private recordings. He called it an orchestrated betrayal of the American justice system. Then Heather took the stand. She didn't look at her father. Not once. She looked straight into the judge's eyes and said, "My silence was complicity. My testimony is atonement." She revealed everything. From the racial bias training that was discarded after 1 week, to the memo that ordered her to not waste firm resources on indigent defendants. She detailed how Marcus's file had been altered, how the witness statement contradicting the police narrative was deleted. And finally she dropped the bomb. The recording from the anonymous flash drive. The courtroom gasped as Gerald Sloan's voice filled the air. "This Daniels kid thinks he's the face of a movement? Let's see how loud he is when nobody's left standing beside him." When the tape ended, even the judge leaned back in his chair in stunned silence. But Marcus wasn't finished. He stood. He walked to the witness stand slowly, then turned to face the gallery. "I lost 10 years of my life," he said. 10 years behind bars for a crime I didn't commit. But I'm not here to relive that pain. I'm here because people like Gerald Sloan think power makes them untouchable. That some of us can be thrown away like garbage. He scanned the room. But I wasn't garbage. I was a man. I am a man. And my life matters. He paused, voice thick with emotion. And today, it's not just about clearing my name. It's about ending this cycle. For everyone who never got the chance to speak. The judge nodded slowly. "Mr. Daniels, your voice is heard." After closing arguments, the courtroom held its breath. And then the gavel came down. Based on overwhelming evidence of misconduct, corruption, and systemic malpractice, this court declares the original conviction of Marcus Daniels null and void. Furthermore, It finds Gerald Sloan and the Sloan and Stone firm liable for punitive damages in the amount of $60 million to be awarded to Mr. Daniels for wrongful imprisonment, defamation, and emotional trauma. The room erupted. Cheers broke out. Reporters shouted. Protesters outside screamed with joy. Marcus closed his eyes and exhaled. 10 years of silence, finally broken. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects were seismic. Gerald Sloan was disbarred. Federal agents launched a full investigation into his firm's other cases. Several prosecutors resigned. A new task force was formed to review wrongful convictions across the state. And Marcus? He used his settlement to launch the Daniels Justice Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to defending wrongfully convicted individuals and reforming legal bias. He hired Heather Sloan as its first director of legal strategy. "I know what you're thinking," Marcus told the press with a wry smile. "Yes. The same woman who once refused to represent me now works to free others like me. That's not hypocrisy. That's growth." And Darius Carter? He was appointed to the state's Commission on Legal Ethics. "I won't let this system break another man like it broke Marcus," he said. 1 year later, Marcus stood on the steps of the same courthouse where it all began. Reporters asked, "How does it feel to finally have your name cleared?" He looked out at the sky, at the people, at his mother finally smiling. Then he said, "I was never the one who needed clearing. The system needed cleansing." He turned and walked down the steps, not as a victim but as a survivor, a fighter, a symbol. And behind him, carved into the wall of the courthouse, were the words, "Justice delayed is still justice. But only if we fight for it." The end. Moral of the story. No matter how powerful or well-connected injustice may seem, the truth will always find a voice, and when that voice refuses to stay silent, real change begins. Prejudice may delay justice, but it cannot deny it forever. Redemption is possible, growth is powerful, and those who are underestimated often become the ones who rewrite history. Always stand for what's right, even when it's not easy, because your courage can inspire a movement and restore dignity to generations that were silenced. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that uplift Black voices and expose hidden truths.